The Nintendo Switch has been my favorite console for the past few years, but it's no surprise the system has a very major downside. Compared to the rest of the console market, the Switch is underpowered, and every time I see a new current game or port releasing, I'm always left to wonder what downgrades I'm going to see to make the game work on the Switch. We've seen lower resolutions, dips, and overall lowered frame rates, and a lack of graphical improvement systems like anti-aliasing as a common practice. Having previously played Monarch, developed by Furyu, on the Switch, I can say I was not holding the highest of performance hopes for their newest title, a port of the 2018 action RPG, Crystar. I know, in a lot of ways it's odd to compare an older game to a newer game, but for parts of this review I will be doing some comparison between Crystar and Monarch, as both were released for the Switch and both are developed by Furyu. As far as raw performance goes, I was actually pleasantly surprised with the Switch frame rate, as far as feel goes, especially compared to Monarch. I was not expecting that, as the game visually looks similar but naturally has more going on, being an action-based dungeon JRPG versus a turn-based single-player map. This is of course a good sign though, as I'd personally argue the smooth control feel in an action-based game is substantially more important than it is in a turn-based game. I won't go too much deeper, but the game feels smooth enough in regards to visual and camera movement, and the only complaint I could see many people having is the semi-long initial load time when starting the game. I would be remiss if I didn't next talk about the combat, as some of you might think my comments about performance being fair and using the word smooth being disagreeable. Being blunt, combat in this game sucks. Despite having different skills, fighting styles, the ability to dodge, and a superpower you can call to action, the combat in the game feels very stale and gets very old very quickly. Nearly all encounters, including the bosses at the end of the stage, feel like you're constantly repeating the same fight, over and over. Unfortunately, along with the stale-feeling repetitive combat, the overall mechanics of the fight feel very stiff and clunky. Characters often control not in ways you'd expect, commonly feeling like there's a delay in responsiveness, veering on the edge of frustration at times. Contrary to the passing frame rate performance, nothing is smooth mechanically about the combat. You have a very poor system for locking onto enemies, a button for a light attack, one for a heavy attack, and a few combinations to unleash a power and skills, none of which ever make the characters feel strong or quick, offering very little feedback to players during fights. Alongside the combat mechanics, the game offers a slightly unique and very uncomfortable skill system. As the player defeats certain enemies, you can capture the strong negative emotion of spirits, which you carry around with you as a burden, until completing the entire stage. This system is slightly jarring, as when specific enemies are defeated, a strange sound will play and players will visually see the negative thoughts as text on the screen. Before moving farther, I'd like to point out that this game may not be for those who are sensitive to darker topics of mental health, as this game is absolutely centric to those topics, and I'm certain not everyone will appreciate this game's coverage of these sensitive issues. The game begins in a confusing manner, but one innocent enough, as we see the main protagonist in a very odd setting that has a lot of familiar looking design if you've just recently been playing Monarch like myself. Confused, the player navigates this dungeon looking space doing exactly what you'd expect, chasing glowing butterflies.
Yes.
Quickly you realize the butterflies appear to possibly be connected to humans, and you find one that is connected to your sister, which a little later turns into your sister wandering around with you. If none of this makes sense, then you must have been listening, because this is a really odd place, and things are about to get weirder. Shortly after traveling with your sister, you encounter what must be an evil character, possibly the evil character. As expected, you'd fight it, and unexpectedly, you'd defeat it fairly shortly. Problem is, she's actually not defeated, and in a painful twist, you end up stabbing and killing your own sister. After that atrocity is over, your character is completely lost and confused, and sensing an opportunity, 2 more characters appear to set the game into motion. They tell you there is a way to bring your sister back as she falls through purgatory, as long as you make a contract of sorts with them. Obviously, the player takes this path, And it's here that we start an ever-revolving door of repeated dungeon crawling, with bosses at the end of every stage, and dialogue breaks in between areas which further flesh out the story. I won't further spoil the story, but we'll leave off talking about it by saying that despite the nature of the topics, the story is the best part of the game. And I think if anyone feels committed to slogging through the combat, they'll likely find themselves fairly engaged and pleased with it throughout. Diving into the miscellaneous, the game is fairly thin and repetitive, where most of your time will be spent exploring similar looking dungeons and fighting similar feeling fights, gathering up new skills until areas are completed. Once you finish an area, you'll be placed back into your hub area, which is just your bedroom. There, you'll contemplate your adventure, pet your dog, try your skills usable, craft them into better skills, and then jump back into the dungeons to repeat it all again. A bit later, you'll gain access to more characters, which you can freely switch between in battles, and each has their own fighting type, better in specific encounters. But unfortunately, don't count on this change making the combat have more teeth to it, as the reality is, it matters very little. Another thing I guess worth mentioning is the game also features a semi-large amount of character costumes. Everything from swim gear to standard outfits, to manga styles, to animal-based mascot gear. Most of the outfits do one of a couple different things by wearing them, offering a bonus in some way, like for example, increasing the odds of picking up more unique skills from battles. Mostly this is just a bit of fun, and I mostly found myself trying out the outfits just for the sake of seeing them, as I didn't see any way to preview them before using them. I know in a lot of ways this review seemed a little more negative than normal, but honestly I quite like the game despite its flaws. It runs very well on the Switch, looks pretty good a lot of the time, has an interesting anime style to the characters, and really the story had me interested. If the story wasn't as alluring and the topics not as heavy or mysterious, I'd likely rate the game much lower. But if I had to stick a number on this one, I'd say it's a solid 6.5 to 7 out of 10. Crystar for the Nintendo Switch releases March 29th in the US and April 1st in the EU and ANZ digitally. Again, I want to thank NIS America for the preview copy, and I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. If you guys want to help support the page, or if you like the content, feel free to hit the thumbs up. If you want to watch more anime news, reviews, and gaming, hit the subscribe button. I'm Dre, and this is Yokuso Otaku.